If you want to hear two guys talk about spring practice in football and some football recruiting, you found the right podcast today.
Locked On Bama, your daily podcast on the Alabama Crimson Tide. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back into Locked On Bama. Luke Robinson, that's me. Jimmy Stein, that's him. Jimmy, spring practice is going nuts. We're about to have a scrimmage tomorrow, if you would. And meanwhile, recruiting also going nuts still for Alabama football. I say we start with actual spring practice stuff and then move on to recruiting in the second segment. So when it comes to spring practice, one name that keeps popping up, I mean, we can talk about Caleb Downs. I've talked about him a gazillion times. So have you. He's my favorite signee in this class. I think he's going to be an absolute superstar. We talked about it in the podcast the other day, how he is with the ones, and that is so rare for an early entrance to be with the ones in spring practice. Now, I mean, to be with the ones, after fall practice, whatever, but to be with the ones this soon is cray-cray. Another dude, though, who's getting lots of love is James Smith, and he's turning some heads and knocking some offensive linemen on their backside, apparently.
Yeah, there's even been photos and video of James Smith working with the ones, just like there's been photos and video of Caleb Downs working. And just because they're working with the ones, that doesn't mean we're here telling you guys they're starters. It's over. It's over. Just put it down in ink. We're not saying that at all. I'm just saying that, hey, they provide us with photos and video, and we make of it what we can. And based on that look, it appears that Caleb Downs and even James Smith on the defensive line get at least some reps with the first team. That's incredible with spring practice now, not even half over until that scrimmage tomorrow. James has a ton of ability. I don't think it's crazy to say that he has the most upside or the most talent of any defensive lineman in the defensive line room in terms of his power, speed, and athletic ability. And it wouldn't be surprising at all to see him be in the rotation with the first team this fall, except for this one thing, which makes what James is doing more incredible than even what Caleb's doing. See, if Caleb is a starter, who did he have to beat out to win that spot? Christian Story, Jaquez Robinson, Devontae Smith, who's hurt, Jake Pope, who's still a new player out there, his fellow freshman Bray Hubbard. It's not a long list of established players at safety. There's plenty of opportunity there. And I think some of the explanation for why Caleb's doing so well so quickly is just, well, who else is going to be there? James Smith has a completely different situation. For him to crawl into the first team, he has to beat out some veteran players that have been around, that have been in the system for 2 or 3 years that aren't playing. Guys like Monkel Goodwine, Isaiah Hastings, Anquan Barnes, Tim Keenan. He had to jump over those guys. But to get into the first team rotation, he had to move returning first team guys out of the way. Guys like Tim Smith, Jamarian Latham, Damon Payne. James Smith would be stealing reps from those guys. So what Smith would be doing playing with the first team, to me, Luke, is even more impressive because he'd be having to beat out returning veterans that we are. Caleb had sort of, to an extent, a wide open opportunity. That's not totally true, but it's partially true. And Caleb is, of course, taking advantage of that. I think Caleb, much like Julio, sort of showed up one of the best players on the team. And that is incredibly rare at an Alabama, especially the way Coach Saban recruits.
Yeah, boy, when you laid out all those names on the defensive line, and we're all very familiar with them. I mean, if you listen to this podcast, you keep up with recruiting like we do, probably. And Jimmy obviously does it for a living. I act like I do it for a living. I just don't get paid for it. And boy, you laid out all those names. And when you hear them in a grouping like that, you're like, wow, I thought one of those guys would be a star by now. I loved Tim Keenan. Now, he wasn't the most highly rated dude, but I loved him as a prospect. Jamarian Latham, again, I liked him a lot. I was a little worried about coming from such a lower classification. Tim Smith, I loved that dude. And you just Anquan Barnes, really liked him a ton. And it's not like any of them are bad. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying nobody's a star yet, which sort of just baffles me. But what you're absolutely right that here's James Smith with more of a golden opportunity than we thought, and he's taking advantage of it.
Well, one name that we didn't mention that I think probably does qualify as a star, at least to me, is Jaheim Otis. I think Otis is a star. He was highly impactful as a freshman, and much like James Smith is apparently doing now, Jaheim Otis showed up and just started taking jobs from veterans, started taking snaps from guys that we expected to see. He took snaps from DJ Dale, who's going to be in the NFL in about 3 weeks. Otis took snaps from him, even though Otis was a true freshman. So I think Otis is a star. Our defensive line, the way we play, the style in which we play, it's not really conducive to putting up big numbers. But what we really want the defensive lineman to do is disrupt and affect the play. And Otis is so good at that. And I think James Smith will be there too. But, in terms of Tim Smith, that's another guy that I think he hasn't been a star yet. If I'm asked, what defensive lineman who hasn't been a great player yet, who's going to blossom into being a great player? I mean, Tim Smith would be at the top of that list for me. He has made quite a few big plays at Alabama because he's been playing with the ones. He's been playing with the starters since he showed up. So this will be year 4 of Tim Smith playing with the ones. The challenge for him is, hey, look, you flashed first round ability. Frankly, you flashed that, but first rounders don't play in flashes snap. So I think that's the challenge for a guy like Tim Smith. But between Otis, Tim Smith, Justin Aboigbe, and James Smith, that's a pretty good foursome right there. And to mention nothing of Payne and Latham and Burrows, who've all played ones. Clint Lamb has a great piece this week on Bama Insider where he predicts snap counts and predicts snap percentages. Like what percentages of the snaps will this defensive lineman play in this? I think off the top of my head, my recollection is Clint had James Smith 4th behind Otis and Aboigbe and Tim Smith. He had James Smith 4th. That's a heck of a statement because those 3 ahead of him are clearly established, solid SEC players. And then having Smith ahead of guys like Payne and Burrows and Latham, who all played with the first team a year ago, that would be pretty incredible.
Yeah. Yes, I go on the Max Roundtable out of Montgomery every Wednesday for Locked On Wednesday. They do Locked On Auburn, Zach Blackerby, and me for Locked On Bama. And he was like, look, now that basketball's over and, all this, what are y'all going to talk about? I said, man, this is just about our favorite time of year. I mean, because it is the silly season and everybody gets so creative. So I think it's so cool what you just talked about, the snap count. That's the kind of stuff we eat up. Now, and the great thing about it is you can write an article like that and literally nobody's going to check you on it later on. I mean,
I'm not sure.
There maybe somebody will, but most of the time people are just so anxious. I mean, it's fodder for like dreaming about next year. And it's so cool. But I need to tell everybody about FanDuel right now, and then we're going to talk about some recruiting. But look, the NBA playoffs are literally almost here. I mean, I think it's next week. It's the perfect time to download FanDuel and start taking in some NBA stuff and putting some cash down on it. FanDuel is America's #1 sports book. They are official partner of the NBA because new customers also get that no sweat first bet up to $1,000. Look, you can just download the FanDuel Sports app. It's safe, secure, it's super easy to use. You get these bonus bets back if it doesn't win with that no sweat first bet up to $1,000. You can bet on whatever you want to, from the money line to points scored to threes drained by somebody. Look, you can bet on player props. You can do player points, rebounds, assists. Here's shout out to our main man, Herb Jones. Last night, 35 points. They were down 20. Jimmy, I was just checking Twitter, and the New Orleans Pelicans official Twitter page put out something that said, Herb Jones going nuts tonight with 20 points at the half. And I was like, wow. Well, The only thing is people are like, yeah, that's great, but he's the only one playing well because they're getting beat by 20. And turns out they win the game 138-131 in overtime against the Grizzlies. Pretty crazy. He had 35 points, 7 assists. He was like 8 of 9 from the free throw line. You could have bet on all those things with FanDuel. So Herb Jones really kicking chicken in the NBA. We love to see it. So don't miss a chance to get that no sweat first bet. All you got to do is go to FanDuel.com/lockedon, FanDuel.com/lockedon, FanDuel.com/lockedon for that no sweat first bet up to $1,000. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA's. Didn't say it earlier because I always forget, just like I usually put myself on mute. Thank you. I haven't yet, but thank you for making us your first listen. We do appreciate it. Man, we've gotten over 4,400 subscribers now on YouTube. I mean, you guys are the best. Appreciate you. And look, I mean this with all sincerity. I try to respond to the comments on YouTube as quickly as I can and as often as I can. And even the ones that are like, hey, y'all are crazy. I don't know what you're talking about. Just keep listening. That's all. We just want to go back and forth. We're not here to make you mad. We're not here to say to blow smoke up your keister. We're here just to say what we think about Alabama sports in general. And I also want to throw in one more thing. We were talking about the Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark sort of rivalry that really doesn't exist between the two of them. It turned into something else. And somebody commented about how, look, if you don't think race is involved with this, then what do you think about Jill and Joe Biden essentially inviting Iowa to the White House, which officially didn't happen? I thought that was stupid. I thought that was a stupid move by Jill Biden to say, hey, we should invite Iowa too. They played so well. No, if you lose the game, you don't get to go. And frankly, I'm not usually one to get on board with some of these race-related things sometimes, but I almost was like, yeah, that feels almost kind of like the Bidens were getting a little bit weird with this. I didn't like that at all. So whoever commented on that, I wanted to respond to that because I didn't have a moment to, I don't think. But anyway, I thought that was a bad call. Look, it goes back to what we've been talking about in society for a long time. It's a participation trophy too many times. And if you lose the national championship, you shouldn't get to go to the White House. I don't care how well you played. That's the deal. Just like you don't get a trophy if you lose the national championship, right? I mean, anyway, that's just something I wanted to throw out there because I wanted to be clear as I could be on that. Now let's talk recruiting because there were some big visitors. KJ Bolden came in and visited. People know him, obviously, from Georgia, a fantastic player. He's a dude. I would love to have him as a part of this class. And then Eddrick Houston is another dude. He's an edge rusher, and Alabama's done okay with edge rushers lately. They've done okay.
I think Eddrick has noticed. He had a long interview with Joseph Hastings in the last day or two that's up today on Bama Insider. And Eddrick has noticed Alabama's success at that position, in particular Will Anderson, who's from Georgia, just like Eddrick Houston. Eddrick's, from Buford, the Atlanta area, similar to Will. And, of course, when Eddrick was there, it was brought up to him of how similar he is to Will. I think he's similar to Will when I watch his high school highlight tape. This is a slam dunk 5-star. We jokingly call him 6 stars here. He's a 6-star. I mean, he is like, you watch his tape, see his size, his burst, his athletic skill, his length, and you're like, that's what a 5-star looks like. I think he's similar to Will. I think he's similar to Keon Keeley. And now one thing about Eddrick, I will say, almost all these guys have at least one question mark. With Eddrick, Eddrick is so big. I think he's bigger than Will at the same age, and maybe even heavier than Keon Keeley at the same age. I wonder if there's a possibility Eddrick grows into just a defensive lineman, somebody like a Jonathan Allen who projected sort of to be a jack linebacker for a lot of his high school career, and then he shows up at Alabama, but he just keeps on growing and never played jack linebacker. I don't even think he played jack linebacker for a single practice at Alabama. I think he was just, hey, dude, you're 280 on your way to 300. You need to line up with your hand on the ground on every snap. And Eddrick might be that type of Jonathan Allen, which is fine. We'll take that too, right? But boy, what a football player. He's too good not to be a great edge pass rusher or even an interior defensive lineman. Also physical and sturdy in the run game to kind of set the edge. I don't know if I can name a player in the country I'm more certain about being really good at the next level than Eddrick Houston. He visited Alabama this week unofficially. He's going to return for an official visit to Alabama. He's going to be who are the best programs in the country? Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State. Well, there's 3 of his official visits right there. I should show you how good this guy is. But I do think he'll officially visit Alabama. I told Hastings in his interview that he's moving his commitment date up, but just up to August. He was planning to go in December near signing day, but now he's thinking that he's going to commit on his birthday, which I think is August 22nd, right about a week before the season gets started. We'll know about Eddrick before the season begins. Apparently, boy, what a dude. There's a lot of dudes. Outstanding year in Georgia, but as we know, Alabama recruits there very well.
One other thing I want to throw out there, by the way, it'd be nice to get KJ Bolden and Eddrick Houston to probably the two top guys in Georgia this year, you think?
Yeah, they're up there. There's a wide receiver, Mike Matthews.
Oh, yeah, he's good.
He's very good, and he likes Alabama a lot. So it's a really, really good year in Georgia, but you could say that every year.
Yeah, that's true. One other thing I want to throw out there about recruiting, Mario Craver has come out with like a top 10 kid from Clay Chalkville. Diminutive, almost kind of maybe a David Palmer-esque, Marquise Mays. That's a better comp. I don't know if anybody ever compares to David Palmer, so let's go Marquise Mays. I think that's a better comp, wouldn't you say?
I definitely like the Mays more than I like the Palmer. It's also maybe some JoJo Earl, Aaron Anderson type. I don't know that he's that.
I was going to TCU or LSU, huh?
Yeah, that's right. Well, they're associated with Alabama, so I figure our fans are kind of, oh yeah, I know those guys. I like the Mays. I think that Mays one is good. I think that might be as good as I heard. Now here's the thing, and this is a compliment to Alabama. Craver's good. He's going to be somewhere in the SEC probably, and I wouldn't rule out Auburn for him. But Alabama is going to sign probably 3 receivers in this class, probably 3. And Perry Thompson's already got 1 spot. But when you look at the list of who Alabama is recruiting at that position and who Alabama has a good relationship, me and Luke wax poetic about Cam Coleman all the time from Central Phoenix City. We're apparently making some progress with Jeremiah Smith, who's a 6-star from South Florida. Matthews in Georgia is a 5-star. There's a couple kids in Texas who are really highly regarded, top 100 players nationally. They like Alabama. I'm just saying there's a pecking order, and it's my opinion. And I think Andrew Bone shared this opinion yesterday on Bama Insider. I don't know that we're going to get down to Craver, if that makes sense. And Craver's good. It's a compliment to Alabama that you can recruit so well at that position. But Craver's really good. He's an SEC player. He's good enough to play at Alabama. In my opinion, I like Luke's Marquise Mays comp there. I think he's in that ballpark. But you're only going to take 3. You've already got 1 who's really good. And I think Alabama's going to focus on a couple of, frankly, 5-star type receivers. So I don't know that there'll be room at the end. We'll see. He's a good player. And you know what frankly gets me upset when I see people say it. They say, well, he's a fallback plan. No, you're either good enough to play at Alabama or you're not. He's good enough. He's good enough. It's just that, hey, there's always an order or a ranking of the kids that you like, and he wouldn't be in that top 3, 4, 5, 6 guys.
Yeah, I don't know that you do a lot of fallback plans anymore with the transfer portal. I mean, why would you? I mean, if you have to go to a fallback, I'm going to take a guy who's experienced. But anyway,
we had some fans calling guys we were taking last year fallback plan. I think Eddrick Hill, who's on the defensive line for us, and we took him kind of late, missed on some in-state guys that we thought we might get, like Peter Woods or Kelby Collins, guys like that. And then you would take Eddrick Hill, and they're like, great, now we're on plan B. We offered Eddrick Hill. I mean, he could have committed back in March before Peter Woods and Kelby. We were never going to say no to that guy. He's legitimately plenty good enough to play for Alabama. So backup plans and plan Bs, I get what that's saying. I'm not saying that's never happened at Alabama, but Nick Saban's Alabama, hey, if you're a take, you're on the A list. But is there an order? Yeah, there's an order. But heck, what I'm talking about with these wide receivers, I'm talking about the top 3 or 4 on our board, or like the top 3 or 4 wide receivers in the United States.
And don't forget, we got Ryan Williams for the next year, hopefully. Anyway, Jimmy, when we come back, let's talk a little bit about the basketball transfer portal. Quick segment here, Jimmy. Basketball transfer portal, some names out there. BJ Mack is a kid from Wofford. By the way, love the name. I mean, just, return of the Mack, do what you want to with it. I like it a lot. And he's a sort of a rough and tumble guy. He got sort of a Michael Ansley vibe for me, if you want to go way back in the Wayback Machine. By the way, Michael Ansley was really good and sort of an unheralded guy, I think, on that 86, 87 team. And then like in 87, 88, he was like the man. But I like Michael Ansley a lot. I think he's maybe a little bit, maybe even more of a bully than Ansley, and definitely a better 3-point shooter, because he does shoot the 3 some.
That's right. I think that's what distinguishes him from, I think you look at BJ Mack, and I think Alabama's got a really good shot here. You look at BJ Mack and say, okay, he's a powerful power forward, a guy that's going to just be under the basket and rebound and score at the basket. He does do those things for sure. But what separates him is he's, for 6'8", 245, he's a good 3-point shooter. I mean, he can really shoot the 3. I mean, so he's going to be a matchup problem for, hey, another team's going to want to put a big body on him. And that big body's going to have a hard time covering BJ out on the perimeter, because BJ can play out there. So that sounds like a Nate Oats player, right? Now I might have to run the floor a little more, maybe lose a few pounds, ideally, to fit into what Alabama wants to do. But hey, if Alabama has 2 types of inside players. One just plays on the block, and he's just, I think, probably the best position to call that position, Luke, he's the dunker, the guy that just sits under the basket, gets garbage offensive points from offensive rebounds and putbacks, and then you feed him down the post, and sometimes he can just dunks the ball, or he gets free for that lob play that we do all the time. That's the dunker, right? Well, the other inside player is more like Noah Clowney. Clowney could really mix it up inside, and he's tough, and he's a good rebounder. He often under the basket, but Noah could also stretch the opponent's defense, right, by drifting out to the perimeter and drawing the other team's 4 away from the basket, unclogging the lane, creating space. And I think this guy is similar to Clowney in that way. Now, I don't think BJ Mack's going to be a first-round pick like Noah Clowney appears to be, but BJ Mack would be a really good addition, and he is a first-team all-conference player coming from that conference that Wofford plays in. And, Noah Gurley came from that league. And as we saw, and particularly in his senior season, Noah Gurley is a good player. The thing is, I think Noah played at Alabama as a junior, maybe a little bit before he was ready. It wasn't pretty all the time, but his senior year, he was ready and good. We just sort of recruited past him. So he couldn't play a ton of minutes. But when Gurley did play, he's a good player.
Yeah, and also it should be noted that Wofford beat Texas A&M last year. I mean, Wofford beats teams sometimes. So, I mean, I think I think Wofford beat Auburn and Alabama in the same year a few years ago.
That sounds familiar. They do have a basketball history. And again, like I said, for people like Wofford, how can that guy? I mean, Noah, I think, played at somewhere else. Didn't Noah play at Furman?
Yes.
I think, yeah. Well, Furman and Wofford are sort of, I'm not saying the same. They're in the same league and same kind of tier.
And Furman won a game in the tournament this year. And just FYI, I came that close to going to Wofford. I was going to go play basketball at Rhodes in Memphis, and it didn't work out one reason or another. It was sort of a late like kind of thing. And then I'd already been accepted to Wofford, not to play basketball, but to just go to school there. And I'd taken a visit there since Spartanburg. It is a gorgeous, gorgeous campus. And one other thing, I know some people don't like the stories. I'm going to tell you a good story. I was an SAE at Alabama, and we were notorious for getting kicked off all the time. Jimmy, you may have heard this, but we had to go to leadership school, and we were going to be awarded the Noble Leslie DeVote Spirit Award or whatever, because we're Mother Mu. SAE at Alabama is Mother Mu, the first one ever. And so we go to Evanston at Illinois, where Northwestern is, and that's where you're having this whole thing in Chicago, whatever. And we also had to go to these classes, and one of the classes was what not to do when you're in a fraternity, meaning, don't haze, don't make people guzzle vodka through a funnel, and all these other things.
And all these other things that y'all were.
That we were 100% doing. And so anyway, we're sitting there, and like everybody just knows to put up with it. Now, like some of the smaller schools are like, yes, exactly. You set aside 45 minutes for each class for study time, and then you, according to my calculations, and they push their glasses up and they do all that. But most everybody was just sort of like, we just got to get through this class almost for legal purposes. I'll never forget this as long as I live, though. This had to be in like 94. I'm sitting there, and there's a guy. He had Wofford on his shirt. He's from the SAE at Wofford, and he's sitting there like the whole time, and he's just miserable. He's so bored. It was a boring class, but it was, you had to pretend like you cared, and he couldn't pretend anymore. And so the guy went 30 minutes talking about how you can't haze, you can't do this, you can't beat them, you can't make them do your laundry, you can't make them take you, be an Uber before Uber's invented, nothing like that. And finally, after 30 minutes of this most boring lecture that's ever happened, the guy from Wofford raised his hand, and the guy said, "Yes, sir. The representative from Wofford. What question do you have, brother?" And he said, "Yeah, if you can't beat them, what are you supposed to do with them?" And I said, "Y'all are about to get kicked off. That's all I know for sure." I mean, I was like, "Man, that Wofford ain't screwing around. I'm glad I didn't go there."
A tough group over at Wofford.
It's a tough group, man.
Well,
so they're the Terriers, man.
Hey, it makes no logical sense as to sports and the show, but I would say that story makes me want BJ Mack even more.
Me too. I hope he was SAE. So anyway, all right. That's going to do it for today's podcast. We'll be back tomorrow. Jimmy, I say, what time's the scrimmage tomorrow?
I think it's 1:00. Why don't we go after the scrimmage?
Let's go after the scrimmage.
Let's record after the scrimmage and see what Coach Saban has to tell us about what happened.
So let's so guys, we won't have one in the morning, but we're going to do it for the afternoon, and looking forward to that. So until then, roll tide, everybody.
Roll tide.